There
Now,
is,
when you're in the
yes.
fifth dimension, I'd like to discuss some of the entities you may wind up and find. Exploring the fifth dimension is fine. Will you have any problems? The answer is no. So let me give you an example of some of the people or beings you can find when you're in the fifth dimension, using like the CD I mentioned if they order the book. First of all, when you're in the fifth dimension, the term that I use is called ultra-terrestrial. Here's a new term for your audience. You're not an extraterrestrial, you're an ultra-terrestrial. Okay, so what are some of the people you'll meet? One are departed souls. So if you have departed relatives, a parent, a grandparent, or even child, anyone who has crossed into spirit, they'll be traveling through the fifth dimension, and you can actually send out the energy using your higher self as you might say, as a social networker to hook up with them. You can see people who are having a near-death experience where they're clinically dying, but they're going to come back to the earth plane. But in that interim state, they're in the fifth dimension, and you can actually communicate and work with them. Your spirit guides. These are people that were once human, but they're more spiritually evolved as us, but they hang around the fifth dimension. Angelic entities, very rare, hard to meet them, but they're there. Your own higher self, which is what you really want to hang out with. This is the perfect component of our soul. It's also called the superconscious mind, and it actually assists us in our karmic cycle. You can meet other fellow fifth-dimensional voyagers, some of my patients, and maybe me, okay, hanging out in the fifth dimension. You can meet the extraterrestrials that are good, the good ones, like Pleiadians, which are called gatekeepers because they hang out in the fifth dimension. They actually help us quite a bit. And, of course, time travel, smart future. They hang out in the fifth dimension, especially, well, any of the ones, even when they teleport, they're still traveling through the fifth dimension to come back in time. So if you meet a time traveler, believe me, you definitely want to meet a time traveler. Their only purpose is to help us spiritually. Why? Because they're us in the future, and the less we mess up the world, the better it is for them in the future.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And I think if you live in, say, for the moment and don't talk about or don't think about repercussions for the next generation or next several hundred generations, right, of people or years, then really we're sort of messing it up for them and for our fifth dimensional beings, like you mentioned.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a reason for all this. There's a positivity behind this. I'm a real, they call me Dr. Positive when I do other interviews because I like to focus in on the positivity of the universe. In the universe, when you have like good versus evil, good always wins one-on-one. So people should understand that. Unfortunately, we're programmed negatively about, from society, especially the media, about cynical people. They're welcome to their First Amendment rights, but I prefer positivity because that's how you win the game. And positivity is much more important. Now, I'd like to give a couple of techniques or suggestions about people who want to travel into the fifth dimension.
Absolutely,
Okay, so
yes.
these are things if you want to do your own out-of-body experiences, like obviously the CD that I talked about, my fifth-dimensional travel one. So here's some examples. One, warm weather this time of the year favors going out of the body. So if you're in your room, even at other times of the year, you always want to keep your room that you're doing this a couple of degrees above room temperature. It'll facilitate astral voyaging, as I call this. Do not attempt to do out-of-body experiences during a thunderstorm. It's not dangerous. It's just that thunder is the sound and event characteristic of the earth plane, so it's sort of like you're swimming upstream like a salmon. It kind of prevents you from going out of the body. Not a good idea.
Gotcha.
You want to wear very loose clothing or nothing at all, okay? And this is an individual event. Don't do it in groups, okay? You want to do this by yourself. You want to make your initial attempts in complete darkness or very dim light so you're not distracted. You want to make sure there's dead silence in the room, so don't have a lot of things going on. Practice alone, as I said. And you want to cut down on food intake or fasting prior to your experience, to your out-of-body attempts. Don't have a steak dinner right before going out of the body, okay? It's not good. And you want to eat, if you want to have something, I would suggest fruits or vegetables before that, just to make sure you don't have a sugared gap, yet you still are going to be rather healthy there. And you don't want to eat nuts of any kind, especially peanuts, because of the biological effects of digestion, okay? You know what I mean? It's you don't want to make a lot of sounds and create a lot of methane while you're about to go out of the body, okay? And you want to abstain, and this is a biggie, no alcohol, no recreational drugs. If you do that, if you ignore my advice, you're going to wind up on the lower astral plane, and you don't want to be there. That's a bad neighborhood. And by the way, this includes ayahuasca and all the other fun things people do.
Yeah,
Not a good idea.
DMT. Yeah, that is the current
Yeah.
trend. Yeah, it's absolutely right. Graham Hancock
That's a
is
very popular. It's
constantly going to
unfortunately it's a
Costa
very
Rica.
popular effect. It's a very popular effect, and it's terrible. Now, let me give you one more example here. Suppose you go out of the body. Let's say you use my technique or whatever you're doing, and you're in the fifth dimension. How do you know which dimension you're on? That's a good point, right? Remember, I mentioned thunder is the characteristic sound of the earth plane.
Yes.
So let's say you're in the astral plane. You're going to hear the roar of the sea. That's the characteristic sound. And this is the source of emotion. It's a very emotional dimension. So if you have violent emotions or positivity or negativity, it's going to be expressed in the astral plane. The causal plane, which is where our Akashic records are actually stored, although you can access them from any dimension, including the earth plane, the sound of that dimension is the tinkling of bells, just like you're in a New Age bookstore. Okay. The dimension above the causal plane is called the mental plane. This is where the masters hang out, the Moses, Buddhas, Jesus, whatever, angelic entities will hang out there. The sound of running water is the characteristic sound of the mental plane. Okay? Beyond that is the etheric plane. Now, this is a very important dimension. The sound of buzzing bees is the characteristic sound. It's the largest of all the dimensions. But the reason why this dimension is important is because there are certain weird-looking entities called etheric plane surgeons. They can operate on your etheric plane or your etheric body, which is a mirror image identical to the physical body. And if you cure the etheric body, you can bring it back to the physical body, and you can cure incurable diseases. And in my book, Soul Healing, I talk about a case of cancer and AIDS that were cured that way. So it's very interesting. Then beyond that is the soul plane. The single note of a flute is the characteristic sound. This is where you go in between lives, where you choose your next life, or where you eventually ascend from. And when you do the eventual ascension, you go into what's called the higher planes, and there are 7 of those. Indescribable orchestra music is a characteristic of that. And when you're there, there's no body anymore. You're pure energy. You're perfect. You're just there's no problems. There's no victims. There's no perpetrators. It's nirvana or heaven, whatever. And the 13th plane is called the God or Nameless plane, where the God energy complex hangs out, so to speak. So those are the dimensions, and that's how you can know where you are. Now, one thing about the mental plane I should mention, it's really cute. Suppose you're on a dimension, and you look down, and let's say you're teleporting or flying. You can do that any dimension except the earth plane. And then you see that the highways are colored blue, like an iridescent blue.
Mm-hmm.
That is the mental plane. That is characteristic of the mental plane. They have blue highways because they make their roads from dirt just like we do, except it's iridescent blue. So that's how you know you're on the mental plane. And that's a really cool dimension because the homes look like abstract designs. Everybody walks around like an angel with white smocks, It's a very spiritual, it's the source of our moral teachings and ethics and philosophy. It's a very, very, very beautiful dimension. So I've been there. I've been to all these dimensions except the upper higher planes, of course. And they're fun. And they're very empowering, and there's never any danger. One question people ask me, say, when is this dangerous? What if I don't come back? Folks, I've been out of the body over 3,000 times. I'm calling you from the earth plane, not from the astral plane. It's perfectly safe.
Now, let me ask you, how long have you been doing this? Because I know you've been doing it for quite some time, and you are the leading expert in future progressions, because there's a lot of people that do past life regressions, but how long have you been teaching people how to do astral projections and going into the future?
I've been doing this field for 45 years. Okay?
Wow.
So that's a generation and a half, and I don't look my age. Oh, by the way, this is important, too. Yes, I don't look my age. I'm very athletic. I play tennis. I weigh about 2 pounds lighter than when I was in college, like 50 years ago. I don't know too many people that can say that.
Wow,
I wrote a book called Look Young and Live Longer, which I want to just talk about for a moment. It talks about how you can slow down and even reverse some aspects of the aging process by using hypnosis. So what does hypnosis do? Now, I have an undergraduate training in biochemistry, so I'm going to play a little biochemist here. When you do hypnosis, and this has been documented by studies done in Harvard, for example, okay, so this is real stuff, you actually increase the production of a substance called DHEA, which is actually dihydroepiandrosyl sulfate, okay? What is DHEA? It actually is an intermediary phase of a sex hormone. It becomes testosterone in men and estrogen in women. In the intermediary phase of DHEA, which is a sulfate, so it's DHEAS actually, it stimulates the production of T lymphocytes, the lymphatic system, and all of our immune system. That's how you can slow down the aging process. The only reason why we age is because our immune system breaks down. That's it. Whatever you do to slow down, to break down the immune system, will increase the quality and quantity of your aging.
Wow.
So you can look younger, you can feel good, you can have tons of energy.
And have, I was just going to say more energy, yeah, and even healing yourself too, right?
I'm not exactly Joe Biden here, okay? I have a lot of energy, okay?
And healing yourself too, right? You mentioned that.
Yeah, I do. I've been doing self-hypnosis forever, of course, and I've used all the CDs that I market here. Like people who want to do out-of-body experiences, other than the one CD they get with the book, if they order the book from me, I have something called the Astral Voyaging CD album, which takes them into various simple and complex events to go out of the body. I also have a time travelers training program, which allows them to go meet time travelers and also teleportation. But if you want to teleport, you need to use the album, not just one title. It's a very complex technique, but you can do it. There are past life. There's a hypnotic time travel album to go back in the past or forward into future lives. There's about 13 different albums. They can see all those on my homepage. But there's also psychic protection, psychic self-defense, I call that, and ascension training. So there's a whole bunch of different things that people can do, and they can do that themselves. Many of these techniques you don't need me for. You can do it yourself. One of my patients was kind of cute. She says, "Doctor, can I play your CDs in the car?" And I said, well, we call that auto-hypnosis. That's a joke. Okay.
Yeah. I was thinking that. Yeah, well, why would you play anything hypnotic in the car?
No,
you're going to wreck.
There's no danger. There's no danger to do that, but you really want to do it where you can focus and not have to worry about somebody cutting you off in the freeway. So you really want to do that with headphones, lying down on a couch or recliner, something where you can be cool and be nice and safe and be able to devote your attention to the actual CD itself rather than to some idiot trying to cut you off in the freeway.
Now, there's a couple questions if you want to take them because they've already racked up a few.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let me see the first one here. This is from Philip Blair. Are the Greys fifth-dimensional beings?
Well, the answer is yes and no. The Greys actually come from the Earth plane. They come from the Zeta Reticuli, 25 light years away, but they hang out in the fifth dimension. So especially the Greys are not here. They're not our friends, okay? They are here to play games with us. They have reproductive problems, so you get the eggs and sperm samples. That's where they do the abductions. They also hang around the fifth dimension. They can be time travelers. Now, in the future, what's interesting, though, the Greys are actually part of a time traveler team. Now, these are good Greys. Now, this is like the 31st century and beyond. But the ones that you meet in the current century, they're not your friends. Now, there's one thing. Suppose you meet an ET, and they're wearing a jumpsuit, and they have an insignia on the uniform that looks like a triangle.
Yes.
Those are futuristic beings. Those are always from the future.
You mean the black jumpsuit that's like one piece with the little insignia?
It doesn't have to. It could be any color. They're usually white or golden is the classic color, but it doesn't matter. But if you see a triangle encircled, that's a futuristic being. People from, like for example, here's another example. If you were to meet a reptilian, which you never want to meet because they're cannibalistic, they eat their mistakes, okay? If you were to meet a reptilian from the current century, they're going to have wings. Those are the Draco. They come from the Draco constellation. But if you meet a reptilian in the future, they don't have wings. They lost that in evolution. So there are different techniques to show you which ones are futuristic, but most of the time travelers are, of course, Earthlings from this planet, not from the others. But there are those from other planets. The Pleiadians will do it. The Greys will do it. The reptilians can do time travel too, but usually they're prevented from doing so because the Pleiadians are the gatekeepers. They kind of control the various wormhole connections and the aspects here of trying to enter into the space-time continuum, like a Stargate kind of thing. They control that, and they're really good entities. They're really good beings, and they help us a lot, and they've helped us throughout civilization. In my book, Time Travel Smart Future, I talk about the evolution of our civilization, the real civilization history, not what you read about in school. And we're talking about Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu, as well as ancient Egypt, and et cetera. So if you really want to know the true history of our planet and our technology, I recommend my Time Travel Smart Future book, as well as my Egypt book, too, which is another good one. It's called Egypt, an Extraterrestrial and Time Traveler Experiment. So that was a good question, though.
Here is, I'm going to take this out of order because it's fitting for what we're talking about. Lars Saturn asks, why a triangle? And I'm assuming he's talking about the insignia.
Yeah, well, the triangle is very significant because our current technology today, if it wasn't for one discipline, we'd be living in caves, and that discipline is geometry. Geometry eventually gave us of all our technology, engineering, calculus, etc. So what's the basis of geometry? Equilateral triangle.
That's right.
Okay. That's why the triangle is, it's sort of like, it's a way of saying to the past, we're going to honor you with a representation of the basis of our technology today. That's why it's done.
Now, here, this is from Frankie Zomboy. Do ETs travel in the fifth dimension?
Yes, I just mentioned that. They travel, the good ones and the bad ones do. They travel in the fifth dimension because it's time travel. You can go from one end of the universe instantaneously, or let's just say very quickly, by traveling through wormholes.
Now, I see
so
that
of course,
what is UTS, but that's ultra-terrestrial, right?
Right. Ultra-terrestrial is anybody who travels into the fifth dimension.
Gotcha. Philip Blair, has Dr. Goldberg worked with Brian Weiss?
No, I know Brian. Brian actually, to make it more simple, I only met Brian once. He came to L.A. for a workshop. Brian is a friend of mine. He actually, I'm sort of like the stimulus of him. He got into his work. His first book came out in 1989, and that was about 15 years after I started my work. So he was very familiar. His second book, Through Time into Healing, mentions past lives, future lives, so he's a big fan of mine. I know Brian, but he doesn't do individual sessions. He hasn't done that for decades. He does workshops, basically. But I know Brian very well.
This is Lasha Senyak. What happens if you decide to stay in your body?
Well, you can say that, you want to, but eventually your body is going to enter into the nitrogen cycle, and you're going to fertilize the lawn. Okay?
Yeah, when
your
you pass
soul
away,
is eternal. The physical body is going to die. Period. No argument on that. Okay. Now your soul is pure energy. It's electromagnetic radiation, like a TV or radio or cell phone signal or computer signal, and that will occupy a different body, and that's called reincarnation. But if somebody wants to stay in this is not like, the ancient Egyptians that like to mummify because they wanted to preserve the body for the pharaoh's next life, It's nice, but if you ever unwrap a mummy, it's skull and bones, You know what I mean?
That's
true. They don't exactly have they don't have their pector, their muscles, they're not going to be pumping iron, okay? So the body will eventually die. The soul is eternal, but not the physical body.
Now, let me ask you this. Is with regards to those who come from Zeta Reticuli, have you ever gotten a glimpse of what their world looks like? This is my own question, by the way.
I don't know. I don't care about the Zeta Reticuli constellation. I'm not interested in their world. They come here. To me, I have zero interest in that because they're mostly negative people. Actually, the reptilians and the Greys are actually genetically related. That's not a compliment. Okay. That would be like saying one of your great-grandparents was Adolf Hitler. I mean, it's not a good compliment, okay? No, I don't. I've never seen the Zeta Reticuli dimension of the world, and I have no interest in doing so. I'm more interested in empowering our planet rather than worrying about what some creepy extraterrestrial civilization is like.
This is from Nicholas Cashmore. Are Greys able to steal a fetus without a physical trace?
Well, they don't steal the fetus. What they can do is they can actually do a fifth-dimensional abduction, but they don't deal with fetuses. They deal with young children to adults to the age of 40. So, for example, there are cases in New York City, as an example, where somebody's in an apartment building on the 50th floor, and a teenager goes into a bedroom maybe to sleep or take a nap or do her homework, whatever, and all of a sudden she's abducted. So how do they do an abduction on an apartment building? What is it, like King Kong? No. What they do is they enter into the fabric of space-time into a wormhole, and they can abduct the person from the wormhole and then bring them back. Use the same wormhole. But they don't deal with fetuses, okay? Never. Not going to happen, okay? They can create a half-human, half ET hybrid, but they do that from a human being that's an adult or a teenager, but they don't deal with fetuses. So they're not pedophiles, okay?
This is from username Nell. It says, "Hi, question. Why the reptilians don't evolve spiritually like all the other races?"
Well, it's because they care not to. They have free will. Even creepy reptilians with that weird nose and their gray, blue, and brown and green and spots in their body, they just decide not to. Have you ever noticed in civilization certain groups, certain countries don't evolve very well? How many years has we had Middle Eastern wars? 3,000,
Yeah,
3,500
yeah, at
years?
least,
Okay,
right?
got it? Okay. How about India and Pakistan? Do they get along very well? I mean, I'm not trying to make fun of these people. I'm just telling you there are certain groups that don't evolve, that don't get along, and they decide not to because they have a free will right to be a jerk or a jerkette.
Yeah, and which also I would think because of that emanates a lower frequency.
Well, okay, it's still a free will. I mean, look, this is like what I call the temptation of life. So let's say that let's say a person is an alcoholic and they go to AA or they try to get off drinking, right? And let's say they've been sober for 5 years. And then something happens in their life, they're very depressed, upset, and somebody offers them a drink. Well, it's their free will and their discipline whether they accept that drink, whether they maintain their sobriety or whether they freak out and become an alcoholic again. Okay, so you see, everybody has free will. We all have our choices, and when somebody makes a bad choice, I don't blame the choice. I blame the person.
For the making
Understand?
the
We have free
decision.
will.
That's right. Yeah. No one put a
Everybody who's
gun to their
mentally
head and said, "Hey, drink," right?
right. Everybody who's mentally stable knows the difference between good and evil or good and bad choices. Okay, it's a question of what they do, and you can't control that. You can't legislate that. You can say, I want to legislate murder is illegal. Fine, but every year, how many people get murdered in this country, especially around the world? Go to Chicago sometime, see how many murders there are, okay? More murders in Chicago than Los Angeles and New York put together, and Chicago is the third largest city in the country, okay? So you can't. People will always make a free will option. I would like people to access their higher self more. They'll make better options, but you can't. You can't. What is that? You can't educate stupidity.